Hello and welcome to the post-budget special program in Bernama TV. I'm Melissa Ong. As our economy emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's time to rebuild and make Malaysia great again. Our budget 2024 continues to build on the Economy Madani framework with holistic measures that complement other recently announced policies such as the National Energy Transition Roadmap, the new Industrial Master Plan 2030, and of course the midterm review of the 12th Malaysia Plan. Now, to weigh in on our conversation, I'm joined right now in the studio is our Investment, Trade and Industry Minister, Datuk Sri TENGKU ZAFRUL. Thank you, Datuk Sri, for taking your time off to come here to Bernama TV to break down what the budget 2024 means to you, your ministry, and of course the Rakyat. So, Datuk Sri, MITI's budget has been increased by 23%. That's quite a lot, year on year. So, tell us how MITI managed to convince the Ministry of Finance on this higher allocation for this budget 2024.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Melissa, for having me here. And of course, thank you to the Ministry of Finance and Prime Minister for increasing the allocation for budget for the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry. But if you look as a whole, the budget was an expansionary one. Therefore, I think most ministries did get an increased budget, despite focusing on balancing the deficit as well. I think the deficit target for next year is around 4.3% compared to what is expected to be around 5% this year. So where is the money going when it comes to MITI? I think it's important to note that as a ministry, we just recently launched the National Industrial Master Plan, and IMP 2030 we call it, focusing on key sectors and focusing on reindustrializing our country, focusing on economic complexity. So there are many initiatives that requires funding support, obviously. And in fact, just for NIMP itself, the government, the Ministry of Finance has allocated 200 million ringgit to ensure that, kickstart some of the programs that was announced and launched by the Prime Minister in September.
Datuk Sri, could you list the top 3 MITI-related measures from Budget 2024 that you think will create a real impact in terms of advancing MITI's policies and also industrial reforms, and on specific high-growth, high-value sectors, and why those 3?
Yeah. Well, there were many. In fact, I think one that one should not take for granted is the fact that the importance of the E&E sector. So the E&E sector, really continues to be an important part of our economy. And in fact, when you look at our export, 80% of our export is from the manufacturing sector. And if we look at in terms of contribution to GDP, 24% of the manufacturing sector contributes to the total value of our GDP. And therefore, the budget that focuses on the important sectors like E&E and chemical and petrochemical is important. So E&E, an example, is how we want to bring up the EV sector, because it links back to E&E, right? So I think it's good that the Ministry of Finance or the Prime Minister announced some incentives for the EV motorcycles, right, where someone who earns 120,000 ringgit a year and below qualifies for a cash incentive or cash grant of 2,400 ringgit if they buy a motorcycle, EV motorcycle. That will spur a demand as well as supply. And when you talk about petrochemical and chemical, the Prime Minister also announced a lot of incentives and tax incentives as well for the integrated Pengerang complex, right? The petroleum complex in Pengerang. So that also will spur the demand. In fact, if you look at the exports, contribution to GDP, E&E 7% and chemical petrochemicals around 6%. So these are major sectors. Therefore, I think it's important. And thirdly, one must not forget that it's important to create the right ecosystem and environment for these key sectors. Apart from Pengerang, the Prime Minister also announced the establishment of a new technology park in northern Perak, Korean. So that I think will help cater towards the demands of the industry.
Datuk Sri, the NIMP 2030 was intended to transform the industry to greater heights and also capitalizing on emerging global trends.
Yes.
So how does the budget and the NIMP 2030 intersect, and which allocation that MITI that you fought so hard, and you received?
Yes. Well, I must say, first of all, like I said earlier, thank you for the collection, but it was not not approved. Not everything was approved, and I was in that position before. Of course, you know, there were many requests. The Ministry of Finance has a fiscal constraint, and I mentioned just now, we want to have a budget that is also responsible, and they have a target of reducing deficit at the same time. So for us, I mentioned about the 200 million ringgit allocation for NIMP. That's key because NIMP, what is NIMP? The National Industrial Master Plan, it's a plan that departs from the old plans where they were based on sector. But today, the NIMP or the Industrial Master Plan is based on 4 missions. You know, one is of course to increase economic complexity. Second is to tech up, you know, ensure that our companies innovate and invest in technology. Thirdly, which is important as well, as we want to meet the net zero target of net 2050 by 2050. So it's about sustainability. And fourth is about security as well as inclusivity. So we want to ensure that the plan covers as much as possible all Malaysian and all industries. We need to have a growth that is inclusive.
You know, Dato' Sri, only 200 million ringgit was allocated for the NIMP 2030's 2 funds, right?
To start off with.
To start off, yeah,
to
start off.
So to start off with.
That seems a long way for the 97 billion ringgit required under the NIMP 2030 for the next 7 years. So what will you prioritize with the first 200 million ringgit to create the most impact and also traction at the start of the NIMP implementation, Dato' Sri?
Yeah, well, the total is, yes, you're right, about 97 billion ringgit, but out of the total, if you look at where the money is coming from, only less than 10% will be from fiscal, from government. That means around 9 billion expected from the government until the year 2030. So most of it, or 90% of it, is from the financial sector, from the capital market, from the equity of the players themselves. So here, the money where is going to go? I think this money is go where we want to facilitate investments that has the positive spillover, not just to the companies but to the people. Because if you look at NIMP, what is the targeted outcome of NIMP? There are 3 targeted outcomes of NIMP. First, as I mentioned just now, the contribution to GDP is 24% today. What we want by 2030, that to increase by 60%. And secondly, you know, in terms of employment, we want to ensure that, you know, more employment is created. We are targeting 3.3 million employment in 2030 for this sector. And finally, this is quite important and is part of the economy Madani framework, is to ensure that our household income goes up. Right? Today, if you look at the median wage for this sector, it's less than 2,000. In fact, just 2,000. And that's even below the average median, which is around 2,424 ringgit. That is the median, and the manufacturing sector is below that. So therefore, our target by 2030 is 4,500 ringgit.
Let's move on to the SMEs. How well do you think that the overall budget 2024 allocation for the SMEs?
Yeah. Well, of course, you know, we integrate well, we collaborate well with various ministries, especially the ministry that is in charge of SME, because SME plays an integral part of the economy. If you look at the total registered number of companies, which includes micro SMEs, around 97%, and the SME itself contributes to GDP close to 40% and employs around 50% of the total workforce. That's around 7.8 million Malaysians. So it is important, and I think if you look at the whole mission under NIMP, when you look at the global supply chain, look at the domestic supply chain, SME plays an important role. So I think the funding that's given, especially in this sector, will definitely go a long way to ensure, especially as they transition towards meeting the ESG standards.
You know, it's good that the government is actually increasing the loan and funding guarantees to the SMEs, you know, but to 44 billion ringgit. However, the SME Association has been quoted as saying, while they laud this move, they iterate there needs to be more transparency and also to make the process easier for the application. So, the criticism justified?
Well, again, you know, from Minty perspective, you know, there's always room for improvement. I will definitely work closely with my colleague in the Ministry of that's in charge of SME, especially SME Corp. We have SME Bank. I mean, all these are the COSCOP Ministry. So I think, of course, we must be open to suggestion and constructive criticism. Also, we must be ready. So let's hear them out. And of course, we have some financial agencies under us who are also helping the SMEs, namely MIDF and also Exim Bank. And you know, recently at MIDF, we launched the Second Chance Financing, where we know that many SMEs today may suffer challenges in their business, not due to the business itself, but due to the various external factors.
You have always mentioned the 5 priority sectors under the Malaysia New Investment Policy, namely the aerospace, chemicals, E&E, digital economy, and also pharmaceutical sectors. So how will MITI further support SMEs to benefit from the push from these sectors?
Yes. So this is what we want to do. I give an example. You're right. There's a five key sector, which is E&E, petrochemical, chemical, health, pharmaceutical, digital economy, as well as the aerospace, right? So in this area, what we want to do is, let's say a company comes to Malaysia to invest FDI. And then what we need to ensure is that there's spillover to the local companies. And most of the local companies are SMEs. So even the E&E sector, if you remember, it started in Malaysia around 50 years ago in the 70s. And today, those SMEs that supporting this multinational are already multinational themselves, even listed on the Malaysian Stock Exchange, even listed in NASDAQ, etc. And now part of the global value chain. So I think it's important that we understand there is a positive correlation between FDI and DDI, and DDI mainly comes from the SME sector. If the first 6 months of this year, for example, our total investment that's coming into Malaysia is 132.6 billion ringgit, and of the 132.6 billion ringgit, nearly half is FDI and nearly half is domestic, and this half of the domestic are mainly from SME as well.
Okay, Datuk Sri, we are now in a time where sustainability is like a buzzword, right? In the all marketing meetings, right? So business today they're really prioritizing and also enforcing sustainable business practices. So we know that big companies, they can comply with the ESG requirements, right? Yeah. But what about smaller companies and and SMEs? How does MITI help to empower them, and also how did the budget 2024 support this?
You're absolutely right, Melissa. I think we need a transition that needs to happen. We all agree that this transition is inevitable, but we may have a disagreement over the timeline of that transition, depending on the country's developed status or where they are at their development. And similarly for companies, right? You are absolutely right. Companies that have resources are able to transition faster and quicker. I mean, faster, quicker is the same thing, but I mean cheaper, right? So for the SMEs, even if we give them the money, they need capacity building as well, right? They need to have the know-how. So again, I think government together with the private sector has to collaborate closely to ensure that that the transition does happen and happen in the right way that does not hamper the growth of the company itself. So recently, MITI launched the industry ESG framework, and this will serve as a guide. And at the same time, we're working closely with the bigger companies to assist as well, because it's important. Because Malaysia, as an export country, net exporter of many goods, our trade to GDP last year was 160%. Many of the market access going forward will demand that our companies at least meet some ESG standards, and it will get tougher and tougher in the coming years.
Okay, we switch gears to a question probably in the minds of all the captains of industry in our country. Does the government intend to liberalize Malaysia's market to make it more easier for the foreign investors to come in?
Well, Malaysia actually is a very open economy. I just mentioned to you what our trade to GDP is, and in fact, many sectors have already been liberalized. Many sectors that come in, the investment that come in are owned 100% by foreign. But when we allow them to come in, if they want incentive, it has to be companies that have the right in the right industry, which gives the right spillover effect, giving the positive multiplier to the economy. And again, there is no differentiation between the benefits or incentive that we give to foreign and domestic investors. Usually, it's the same. And at the same time, I think it's important to note that for Malaysia, we must, we're a small country, but we are a country which have good infrastructure, good talent. So when investments do come in, we don't restrict in terms of shareholding, unless for strategic sectors like banking, etc.
How does Budget 2024 ensures there's a good balance between FDIs and also DDIs throughout the nation, ensuring no state or some segment of the population misses out?
Correct. So that is important. In fact, it's so important that it's part of the National Industrial Master Plan and is under Mission 4 of the National Industrial Master Plan. So here, yeah, we know if we look at the GDP per capita of Malaysia, and then you look at GDP per capita of the state, there are 4 high-income states in Malaysia, namely Sarawak, Johor, Penang, and Selangor. There is gap, so that's why we consciously look at how to narrow that gap in terms of geography, but also in terms of sectors in Malaysia. So under the IMP or the Industrial Master Plan, there is focus on narrowing that gap. So there's some incentive and facilitation that is required to achieve that over time.
The PM announced a visa liberalisation plan under Budget 2024 to secure skilled labour. The budget also allocated 70 million ringgit for the academy in industry. There is a multi-tier levy here, and also the 30 million ringgit incentives to the industry to train the local workforce, including offering them their expertise as instructors. So are all these labour and talent-related strategies sufficient to enable NIMP's ambitious goals?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you to the Ministry of Finance for that allocation. That will be under the Malaysian Productivity Corporation, which looks at AII. And it's important because we are working very closely with the industry. We understand the industry's need. We understand what industry want from in terms of when it comes to talent. We don't want to produce talent that is irrelevant to the industry. So this kind of support, this kind of funding will mean that we can, be more competitive. Malaysia can be more competitive in producing the right talent for the industry.
On a related note, Dato' Sri, the progressive wage system policy to increase wages in Malaysia was identified under the NIMP 2030 as being a key enabler that was highly anticipated but was not mentioned in the Budget 2024. Your comments?
Well, on that, I think, again, the Prime Minister, have discussed this, and this is under the Economic Planning Unit, the Economic Department, now it's the Economic Ministry, have looked at this, and I'm sure they are still studying before announcing further on this. And when it comes to progressive wage, it is an issue where there's many other inputs that you need to consider, and I trust that the Economic Ministry is looking at this.
Dato' Sri, if you look around the region, we see Indonesia has cut a US $5 billion nickel deal with Tesla. Vietnam has VinFast. Thailand is aiming to convert 30% of its annual production of 2.5 million vehicles to EVs by 2030. Even our Proton Gili has laid out plans to set up an EV manufacturing plant in Thailand. So where does Malaysia see itself situated in the regional EV ecosystem? And how much value does the country expect to unlock from the EV sector, and including from the spin-offs and also the spillover in the industries?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think for me, my view is that it's good that our neighboring countries within ASEAN, especially, or 10 member states, are looking at EV because we can make ASEAN an EV center because we can do, Indonesia can do that part of the supply chain, we can do one part of the supply chain. Of course, when it comes to downstream, on the ES sector, we have been quite established in there. So on the upstream, Indonesia can work with us together. And then, ASEAN as a whole, you look at ASEAN, is the 5th largest economic bloc, population of 680 million, GDP of $3.7 trillion US. So this is an opportunity for us and ASEAN as a bloc to also trade together. The intra-trade within ASEAN is only less than 20%. So I see the opportunity. EV is a sector where I think ASEAN and Malaysia, as a part of ASEAN, together with China, with Thailand, and Vietnam and Indonesia, can win this game.
Dato' Sri, Budget 2024 was conceived before the, what's happening now in the conflict in the Middle East broke out. So how do you think that this will impact the effectiveness of the Budget 2024? And is there any, would the government pivot in any way to tackle, what is happening right now?
Well, again, I think Malaysia as a country, we're an open country, a country that looks at things objectively. You can see that the Prime Minister, recently went to Egypt, was in Turkey, was in Saudi, and many issues and was discussed, including geopolitics. But for me, and for METI, we are monitoring this closely. As a ministry in charge of investment trade, we are looking at this closely, but we don't see yet an impact unless it escalates.
A famous quote says, "Without execution, vision is just another word for hallucination." That is true. So what is the government going to do to ensure that the budget 2024 will be executed as envisaged?
Correct. Well, if you have an execution, if you have a plan, but you don't have you can't execute, it's just a vision, right? Yeah. And if you have no plan and you can execute, it's a nightmare.
That's right.
That's a Mandarin saying, is it a Chinese saying? Is it? I don't know. I heard someone say that before, but you're absolutely right. That's why under the National Industrial Master Plan, again, we have a governance structure where we have a reporting to the council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. But more importantly, on a day-to-day level, we have a delivery management unit, DMU we call it, to monitor the execution of the master plan.
So, any closing thoughts, Datuk Sri, before we wrapped up the whole show?
Yeah, I think this is for the Industrial Master Plan and for the Malaysia investment climate. I think this is our chance. If we can implement the Industrial Master Plan properly, this is our second chance for a second takeoff for our industry.
That is true. We have actually about 3 minutes left.
Oh, you do? Okay. Actually,
okay,
I've given my long
so
answers longer.
we're gonna ask you another question.
Okay.
So how does METI actually see Budget 2024 measures and its allocation as pushing through the industrial reform agenda as stipulated in the NIMP 2030?
Yeah, I think what has been announced and it really, supports the agenda that we have to re-industrialize Malaysia. If you look at the economy Madani framework, we want to be the top 30 countries in the world in terms of GDP. We'll already be number 12 in terms of competitiveness and various other targets that we want to achieve. And if you look at GDP, two of the engine of growth for GDP is trade and investment. So it's key that we focus on the execution.
I noticed that you've been going out to solicit foreign direct investments, like, going to see Tesla and, all this that's been laid out, So any other plans to, really connect with big names and bring the investment back to Malaysia? I think that's what a lot of people are, asking.
Yeah. Well, again, it is challenging out there. We have a window here because of, geopolitics and what's happening in the between US and China, the trade tension, etc. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, based on UNCTAD numbers, FDI, global FDI actually is down by 12% in 2022. But for ASEAN, it's up by 5%. It shows that we are bucking the trend. And why is that? And because of the realignment of supply chain, as companies relook at where their supply chain should be. We're talking about supply chain resiliency here. And similarly, for Malaysia, we need to attract those companies to come to Malaysia. We have that window, we have the right ecosystem, we have a national investment plan focus on this 5 sector. So we are going out there to make sure that we identify, it's like a big puzzle, which is where is the empty one, so that we can link the gap so that the ecosystem becomes complete for other companies to also come in. Because companies will come in where the ecosystem is there.
So any names at this moment of time? Anything to reveal to us, Datuk Sri?
That was a good try, Melissa, but no.
Okay, so it's still kept under the...
We will announce once it's...
Right, very good. But, just coming back to Tesla, a lot of things has been said about Tesla, but do we have the infrastructure, especially for the stations, charging stations for all these cars and also EV motorbikes? Yes,
we do not have it yet. It is being rolled out. I think it's about 1,240 charging stations today. And while ratio of cars to charging apparently okay, but again, where is it situated? We need to roll it out. We have a plan by 2025 to have 10,000. And I think yesterday I was just chairing the National EV Steering Committee together with my fellow cabinet ministers, and we are looking at how do we ensure that this is executed and implemented. So to me, we have to start somewhere. We're moving at a rapid space, and we need to accelerate this further because it is a chicken and egg situation as well, because there is anxiety over distance for EV cars, right? People will say, I want to buy, but what happens if there is, suddenly I run out of battery?
That's right. I was supposed to buy an EV car, but that was because of the issue of just finding the station to charge.
Don't you want to help the environment? Don't you want to help?
Recycling. But anyway, Datuk Sri, There's so much more to unpack, and definitely we'll have you back in the studio to reveal to us the big names and collaborations that MITI will be, joining forces with. But it looks like we need to invite you again, Dato' Sri, but we wish you great success for all that you do for our nation. Thank you so much, YB.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you again for having me.
To all our viewers, thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Bernama TV for many more insightful discussions. I'm Melissa Ong. See you next time. Bye for now.